The hammer slipped from Harrison Zimmer's calloused hand and clattered against the wooden shingles as he twisted to catch his balance on the steep roof, his boots finding purchase on the beam beneath, just as a woman's sharp gasp cut through the mountain air below. Natalie Lawrence pressed one hand against her chest, feeling her heart hammering beneath her traveling dress as she stared up at the man who had nearly fallen to his death. She had arrived in Black Hawk, Colorado, only an hour before, her stagecoach rattling into the mining town nestled in the Rocky Mountains on this warm afternoon in June of 1878, and already she was witnessing near disaster. The man on the roof caught his balance, retrieved his hammer, and went back to work without so much as acknowledging her presence, his broad shoulders moving with practiced efficiency as he drove another nail into place. "Excuse me," Natalie called up, shading her eyes against the bright sun. "Is this the Zimmer ranch?" The hammering stopped. The man shifted his position, turning to look down at her, and Natalie found herself staring into a face that was all hard angles and sun-weathered skin, with eyes the color of storm clouds that studied her with an intensity that made her breath catch for an entirely different reason than his near fall. "Depends on who's asking," he said, his voice rough as gravel. "I'm Natalie Lawrence. I wrote to your mother about the position as schoolteacher for your younger siblings." She lifted the carpetbag she carried as if it might serve as proof. "Mrs. Zimmer wrote back 3 weeks ago, telling me to come as soon as I could manage." Something shifted in his expression, though she could not quite name what it was. He set down his hammer carefully this time and made his way to the edge of the roof where a ladder leaned against the house. His descent was smooth and controlled, each movement speaking of a man comfortable with physical labor in high places. When his boots hit the ground and he turned to face her properly, Natalie realized he was taller than she had thought, with a lean, rangy build that came from years of hard work rather than easy living. "My mother passed 2 months back," he said, and though his tone remained flat, she saw the grief flicker across his face like sheet lightning. "Fever took her fast. I've been meaning to write and tell you not to come, but there hasn't been much time for letter writing." The words hit Natalie like a physical blow. She had lost her own mother 4 years earlier, knew the particular ache of that absence, but more pressingly, she had spent nearly all her savings on the journey from Philadelphia, sold most of her possessions, and burned her bridges with the boarding house where she had been living. She had nothing to return to, no safety net waiting if she turned around. "I'm so sorry for your loss," she said, and meant it. "Your mother wrote such warm letters. She seemed like a wonderful woman." Harrison looked away, his jaw working. "She was the best of us." "How many siblings do you have?" Natalie asked, though she already knew the answer from the letters. She needed to keep him talking, needed to find a way to salvage this situation before she found herself stranded in a mining town with no prospects and dwindling funds. 4. Samuel's 14, Thomas is 11, Emma just turned 9, and little Grace is 6. He pulled off his work gloves and shoved them into his back pocket. "I've been managing them as best I can, but the ranch work doesn't stop for morning, and I can't watch them and work the land and handle everything my mother used to do. Sam's been trying to help, but he's just a boy, and the younger ones need more than I know how to give them." There it was, the opening she needed. "Then it seems I've arrived at exactly the right time after all," Natalie said, straightening her shoulders. "Your mother hired me to teach the children and help with household management. That need hasn't changed, has it?" Harrison studied her with those storm cloud eyes, and she got the sense he was taking her measure in the same way he might evaluate a horse or a piece of equipment, checking for flaws and weaknesses. She lifted her chin and met his gaze steadily, refusing to be found wanting. She was 23 years old, educated at one of Philadelphia's better schools for young women, and she had been supporting herself as a teacher for the past 3 years. She was not some delicate flower who would wilt at the first sign of hardship. "Can you cook?" he asked finally. "Yes." "Clean?" "Obviously." "Handle 4 children who haven't had proper supervision in 2 months?" "I taught 30 students at a time in Philadelphia. I believe I can manage 4 children." The corner of his mouth twitched, and she wondered if it might have been the ghost of a smile. 30 students who went home at the end of the day. These 4 live here, and they're wild as March hares right now. Emma bit Sam last week during an argument, and Grace has taken to hiding under the porch whenever anyone tries to get her to do something she doesn't want to do. "Then it's a good thing I have patience and experience with difficult children." Natalie shifted her carpetbag to her other hand. "Mr. Zimmer, I understand this situation isn't what either of us planned, but I'm here, I'm qualified, and frankly, I don't have anywhere else to go. You need help, and I need employment. It seems to me we can either help each other, or we can both struggle alone." Harrison was quiet for a long moment, his gaze drifting back to the half-repaired roof. She followed his eyes and noticed for the first time how much work surrounded them. The house itself was a sturdy two-story structure, clearly built with care, but it showed signs of neglect. Weeds pushed up through the vegetable garden. Laundry hung limp on a line, looking as if it had been there for days. A chicken wandered past, followed by several others, pecking at the ground in their eternal search for food. "Room and board, plus $30 a month," Harrison said abruptly. "You'll have the room off the kitchen. It's small, but it's private. You'll teach the children their letters and numbers and whatever else you think they need to know. Help keep the house in order. Cook meals. My mother used to handle all that and more, so I know I'm asking a lot." $35, Natalie countered, "and I'll need 1 day a week to myself." His eyebrows rose slightly. "You negotiate." "I'm worth $35, Mr. Zimmer." "Harrison," he said, "if you're going to be living here, we might as well use given names, and 35 it is. Can you start today?" Relief flooded through her, though she kept her expression composed. "Right now, if you need me to." This time, he definitely smiled, just a quick curve of his lips that transformed his face from harsh to something approaching handsome. "Come on then, I'll introduce you to the chaos." He led her toward the house, and as they approached, Natalie heard the sounds that had been masked by their conversation. Children shouting, something breaking, and then a wail that suggested someone had been injured or at least offended. Harrison's shoulders tensed, but he kept walking, pulling open the front door to reveal a scene that was indeed chaotic. The interior of the house was lovely beneath the disorder, with wooden floors and walls that glowed golden in the afternoon light, streaming through the windows. But every surface was covered with the detritus of children living without proper supervision. Abandoned toys, scattered books, dirty dishes, and clothes draped over furniture. In the middle of the main room, 2 boys wrestled on the floor, while a girl with braids watched from the stairs, her expression suggesting she had seen this performance many times before. Another, smaller girl was nowhere to be seen. "Samuel, Thomas, that's enough," Harrison said, his voice cutting through the noise like a knife. The boys stopped immediately, scrambling to their feet. Both had Harrison's dark hair, though the older one had their mother's softer features, while the younger was clearly going to grow into his father's sharper angles. They stared at Natalie with open curiosity. "This is Miss Lawrence," Harrison continued. "She's going to be staying with us, teaching you and helping run the house. You'll treat her with respect, follow her instructions, and for the love of everything holy, you'll try not to burn the place down while I'm working. Understood?" "Yes, sir," they chorused, though their eyes never left Natalie. The girl on the stairs stood up and walked down slowly, her movements careful and deliberate. She had the same dark hair as her brothers, but her eyes were a startling green, and her face carried an expression far too solemn for a 9-year-old. "I'm Emma," she said. "Mama wrote about you. She was looking forward to your arrival." The words were simple, but they carried a weight that made Natalie's throat tighten. "I was looking forward to meeting her as well. She wrote wonderful letters." Emma nodded once, then turned to her oldest brother. "Grace is under the porch again." Harrison sighed, the sound of a man at the end of his rope. "I'll get her." "Let me," Natalie said, setting down her carpetbag. "If I'm going to be teaching her, we should start building trust now." She saw the hesitation in Harrison's face, the instinct to refuse help warring with the exhaustion of managing everything alone. Finally, he nodded. "She's fast, and she bites if you try to grab her." "I'll keep that in mind." Natalie made her way back outside and around to the side of the house where the porch wrapped around. She crouched down, her traveling dress pooling in the dirt, and peered into the shadowy space beneath the wooden planks. 2 small eyes gleamed back at her from the darkness. "Hello, Grace," Natalie said quietly. "My name is Miss Lawrence, though you can call me Miss Natalie if you prefer. I've had a very long journey today, and I'm quite tired and hungry. I was hoping you might come out and show me where the kitchen is." "Go away," a small voice said from the shadows. "I could, but then I wouldn't know where anything is, and I was thinking of making something nice for supper. Do you like biscuits?" Silence. "I make very good biscuits," Natalie continued conversationally. My mother taught me when I was about your age. The secret is to keep the butter cold and not overwork the dough. What's your favorite thing to eat? More silence, but Natalie thought she detected a slight shift in the shadows. Mine is apple pie, Natalie said, especially in the autumn when the apples are fresh and sweet. But it's the wrong season for that now. In summer, I like strawberry preserves on fresh bread. Does your family have a strawberry patch? Mama did, Grace said, her voice cracking on the word. But nobody takes care of it now. Natalie's heart clenched. Would you like to take care of it? I don't know much about growing strawberries, but I'm willing to learn if you'll teach me. The eyes in the darkness blinked. Then, slowly, a small figure began to emerge from under the porch. Grace was tiny for 6 years old, all skinny limbs and tangled brown hair, with Harrison's gray eyes set in a face that should have been cherubic, but instead looked haunted. Dirt smudged her cheek, and her dress was torn at the hem. I don't know if I remember how, Grace whispered. Mama did most of it. Then we'll figure it out together, Natalie said, extending her hand. What do you say? Should we see about those biscuits and then maybe take a look at the strawberry patch? Grace stared at the offered hand for a long moment, and Natalie held herself perfectly still, letting the child make the choice. Finally, small fingers crept into hers, and Grace allowed herself to be drawn out into the sunlight. Harrison was standing near the house's corner, watching, and the expression on his face when he saw his youngest sister holding Natalie's hand was one of such raw relief that Natalie had to look away. This man was drowning, she realized, pulled under by responsibility and grief, and the sheer impossibility of being everything these children needed. They went inside together, Grace still clutching Natalie's hand, and the other children stared as if witnessing a miracle. Harrison cleared his throat roughly. I need to finish the roof before dark, he said. The last storm found every weak spot. Can you manage here? We'll be fine, Natalie assured him. Go do what you need to do. He left, but not before his eyes met hers, with something that might have been gratitude or might have been something more complicated. Then he was gone, back to his ladder and his hammer, and Natalie was left facing 4 children who desperately needed structure, stability, and a sense that life would eventually feel normal again. All right, she said briskly, releasing Grace's hand only to push up her sleeves. Let's start with the basics. Samuel, Thomas, I want you to gather all the dirty dishes from every room and bring them to the kitchen. Emma, you're going to help me figure out what ingredients we have. Grace, if you're willing, you can show me where your mother kept things. Can everyone do that? To her relief, they moved to obey, clearly starved for someone to simply tell them what to do. As they worked, Natalie began to piece together the household's reality. The pantry was better stocked than she had feared, though it was clear no one had been doing regular shopping. There was flour and cornmeal, dried beans, and salt pork, a few precious tins of peaches and tomatoes. In the cold cellar, she found butter and milk, eggs, and a small wheel of cheese. It was enough. She could work with enough. While the light lasted, Natalie worked steadily, directing the children in cleaning up the main living spaces and starting supper. She mixed biscuit dough while Emma peeled potatoes with surprising skill, and Samuel brought in fresh water from the well. Thomas set the table without being asked, and Grace sat on a stool in the corner, watching everything with those solemn eyes. The rhythm of domestic work was soothing, familiar. Natalie had helped raise her 3 younger cousins after her mother died, and though she had eventually moved out to support herself through teaching, she had never lost the skills those years had taught her. Her hands knew how to turn flour and butter into something nourishing, how to slice vegetables efficiently, how to time multiple dishes so they finished simultaneously. As the sun began to sink behind the mountains, painting the sky in shades of gold and pink, the smell of cooking food filled the house. Natalie saw the children begin to relax by increments, their movements becoming less furtive, their voices rising above whispers. By the time she called them to the table, they were almost acting like normal children rather than small, wounded creatures. Harrison came in just as she was plating the food, his hair damp with sweat and his shirt sticking to his back. He stopped in the doorway of the kitchen, taking in the scene, the clean table set with mismatched plates, the children already seated and waiting, the food steaming in serving bowls, and Natalie standing there with a towel over her shoulder, looking more at home than should have been possible after just a few hours. You fixed the roof, Natalie said, nodding toward him. We fixed supper. Seems like a fair trade. He moved to the basin near the door and washed his hands and face, the water turning gray with dust and sweat. When he turned back, droplets still clinging to his jaw, He looked years younger than he had that afternoon. Some of the crushing weight lifted from his shoulders. "It smells incredible," he said, taking the seat at the head of the table that Emma had left empty for him. "I can't remember the last time we had a real meal." 3 days ago, Thomas piped up. "Sam tried to make stew, but he burned it." "I did not burn it," Samuel protested. "It was just a little dark." "It was black," Emma said flatly, "and it tasted like charcoal." Natalie hid her smile and began passing the serving bowls. "Well, tonight, nobody has to eat charcoal. Samuel, would you like to say grace?" The boy blinked in surprise, then flushed with what might have been pride. He bowed his head, and the others followed suit. "Thank you for this food, and for Miss Natalie coming to help us. Please watch over Mama in heaven and help us to be good. Amen." The meal was quiet at first, everyone too focused on eating to talk, but gradually, conversation began to flow. The children told Natalie about the ranch, about their few neighbors, about the school in town that they had stopped attending after their mother died. Harrison interjected occasionally, mostly to correct exaggerations or remind his siblings of details they had forgotten. Natalie watched him as she ate, noticing the way he cut Grace's meat into smaller pieces without being asked, the way he listened intently to Thomas's rambling story about a fox he had seen near the chicken coop, the way his eyes softened when Emma laughed at something Samuel said. He was a good man, she thought, thrust into an impossible situation and doing his best to hold everything together through sheer stubborn will. After supper, she oversaw the children's preparations for bed, a process that revealed just how far standards had slipped. Grace's hair was so tangled that Natalie had to spend nearly half an hour working through the knots with a comb and patience. The boys' room was a disaster of scattered clothes and forgotten toys. Emma's space was obsessively neat, everything arranged just so, and Natalie recognized it for what it was, a child's desperate attempt to control something in a world that had spun beyond her grasp. By the time all 4 children were in their beds, clean and calm, and looking more settled than they had in weeks, Natalie was exhausted. She made her way back downstairs to find Harrison still at the kitchen table, a ledger open in front of him and a pencil in his hand. He looked up when she entered. "They're all down?" he asked. Grace wanted 3 stories, but yes, they're all in bed. Natalie began clearing the last of the dishes. "Your mother must have been an extraordinary woman to manage all this and make it look easy." "She was," Harrison said quietly. "My father died 5 years ago. Accident with a horse. Mama never complained, never let us see her struggle, but I know it was hard. She just kept going, kept holding everything together." He set down his pencil. "I'm trying to do the same, but I'm not her. I don't have her touch with the children, or her way of making a house feel like a home." Natalie sat down across from him, her hands wrapped around a cup of lukewarm coffee she had poured herself. "You're doing better than you think. Those children love you. That's obvious. They need more than love. They need stability, routine, someone who knows how to handle them without everything turning into a battle." He rubbed his face with both hands. "I'm grateful you're here, Miss Lawrence. More grateful than I can properly express." "Natalie," she said, "if I'm to call you Harrison, you should use my given name." He met her eyes across the table, and something passed between them, some recognition of the strange intimacy of their situation. They were not quite employer and employee, not quite friends, but something undefined that would need to find its own shape. "Natalie," he said, testing the name. "All right, and I meant what I said. Thank you for today, for Grace especially. I've been trying to reach her for weeks, but she just keeps hiding." "She's terrified," Natalie said softly. "They all are, but she's the youngest, and she doesn't have the vocabulary to express what she's feeling, so she hides where she feels safe. Under the porch." "Under the porch," Natalie agreed. "But she came out today, and that's a start. Give her time. Give them all time." Harrison nodded slowly. "I should let you get some rest. It's been a long day for you." It had been, but Natalie found herself oddly reluctant to retreat to her small room. There was something compelling about sitting here in the quiet kitchen with this tired, determined man who was trying so hard to do right by his siblings, but she recognized the signs of her own exhaustion pulling at her, and she knew tomorrow would bring its own challenges. "Good night, Harrison," she said, rising from the table. "Good night, Natalie." She made her way to the small room off the kitchen that would be hers, It was indeed small, barely large enough for the narrow bed and chest of drawers it contained, but it was clean, and the window looked out over the meadow behind the house. She could see the dark shapes of the mountains rising against the star-filled sky, and the sight of all that vast wilderness both thrilled and frightened her. She was a long way from Philadelphia, from everything familiar and safe. But as she unpacked her few belongings and changed into her nightgown, Natalie felt something she had not experienced in years. A sense of purpose beyond mere survival. These children needed her. Harrison needed her. And perhaps, though she was only beginning to admit it to herself, she needed them too. Sleep claimed her quickly, pulling her down into dreams of tangled hair and biscuits and storm-gray eyes that seemed to see more than they should. The next week settled into a routine that gradually imposed order on the chaos. Natalie woke before dawn each day and started the fire in the kitchen stove, put coffee on to boil, and began preparing breakfast. Harrison would appear shortly after, already dressed for work, his hair damp from washing. They would share a few quiet moments before the children woke, discussing the day's plans and any issues that needed addressing. Then the children would tumble downstairs, and the house would fill with noise and energy. Natalie served breakfast, oversaw the cleaning of dishes, and then gathered the children around the large kitchen table for lessons. She had brought her teaching materials from Philadelphia, and she supplemented them with whatever she could find or create, turning the education of 4 wildly different children into something engaging and effective. Samuel was bright but restless, his mind always leaping ahead to the next thing. She gave him advanced mathematics and had him read to the younger children, feeding his need to feel useful and mature. Thomas was slower but more methodical, and she learned to give him time to work through problems at his own pace. Emma was hungry for knowledge, devouring every book Natalie could provide and asking questions that often stumped her teacher. And Grace gradually began to emerge from her shell, her small voice growing stronger during lessons. In the afternoons, Natalie worked with the children on household tasks, teaching them the skills their mother would have passed on if she had lived. She showed Emma how to knead bread properly. She taught the boys to mend their own clothes. She worked with Grace in the strawberry patch, the two of them weeding and watering while discussing everything and nothing. Through it all, Natalie was constantly aware of Harrison's presence, even when he was not in sight. She would hear him working around the property, the rhythmic sound of an axe splitting wood, or the distant lowing of cattle being moved. Sometimes she would look out a window and see him in the distance, a dark figure against the bright landscape, and feel her heart perform a small, unexpected flutter. He was a good man. She had known that from the first day, but as the weeks passed, she came to understand the depth of his character. He worked from dawn until well past dusk, pushing himself to exhaustion to keep the ranch running, while also trying to be present for his siblings. He never complained, never took out his frustration on the children, never treated Natalie as anything less than an equal partner in the household's management. And slowly, incrementally, the household began to heal. The children smiled more, laughed more, fought with the normal squabbles of siblings, rather than the desperate conflicts of traumatized souls. The house itself seemed to breathe easier, the rooms bright and clean, the gardens tended, meals regular and nourishing. One evening in late July, after the children were in bed, Natalie stood at the kitchen window, washing the last of the dishes. The sun had just set, leaving the sky a deep purple blue, and she could see the first stars beginning to emerge. Behind her, she heard Harrison enter, his boots heavy on the wooden floor. "You don't have to do all that tonight," he said. "It can wait until morning." "I don't mind," Natalie replied. "I find it soothing, actually. Gives me time to think." He moved to stand beside her, picking up a towel to dry the dishes she set on the rack. They worked in companionable silence for a few moments before Harrison spoke again. "I need to go into town tomorrow. Supplies and some business at the assayer's office. I thought I might take the children, let them get out for a day. Would you like to come?" Natalie's hands stilled in the wash water. In all the weeks she had been here, she had not once left the ranch. Part of her had been content with that, wrapped up in the work and the children and the strange new life she was building. But another part had been curious about the town, about the wider world beyond this property. "I would," she said, "but only if you think the children can manage it." "I think they need it," Harrison said. "Need to remember there's a world beyond this ranch, and need to see that we can function as a family outside these walls." He set down a dried plate and reached for another. Besides, you should meet some of the townspeople, make connections. This is your home now, too. His words sent a warm pulse through her chest. Your home now, too. When had that happened? When had this place become more than just employment, more than a temporary stopping point? She supposed it had been gradual, a slow accumulation of days and meals and small moments that had woven her into the fabric of this family. Then yes, she said, I would like to go. The trip to Black Hawk the next day was an adventure. Harrison hitched up the wagon, and they all piled in, the children excited and chattering. The road wound down from the ranch toward the town, following the creek that gave the region its water and its wealth. Black Hawk sat in a narrow valley, the mountains rising steeply on either side. And as they descended, Natalie could hear the constant thunder of the stamp mills, where ore was crushed and processed. The town itself was a jumble of wooden buildings clinging to the hillsides, connected by steep streets and precarious staircases. Miners moved through the streets in groups, their faces marked with exhaustion and dust. Freight wagons rumbled past, laden with supplies or ore. The air smelled of smoke and rock dust, and the slightly metallic tang of water running over mineral-rich stone. Harrison guided the wagon down the main street, pointing out landmarks to Natalie. The general store, the assayer's office, the church where services were held every Sunday. He stopped in front of the store, and they all climbed down, the children immediately drawn to the window display with its array of penny candies and toys. Samuel, you're in charge, Harrison said. Keep everyone together and don't let anyone wander off. Miss Natalie and I need to handle some business. Inside the store, Natalie breathed in the familiar scents of coffee and spices, leather and lamp oil. The proprietor, a stout man with impressive mutton chops, looked up from his counter and broke into a smile when he saw Harrison. Harrison Zimmer, about time you showed your face in town. And who's this? This is Miss Natalie Lawrence, Harrison said. She's staying with us, teaching the children and helping with the household. The proprietor's eyebrows rose with interest, and Natalie could practically see him filing away this information to share with the town gossips. Is that so? Well, welcome to Black Hawk, Miss Lawrence. I'm Robert Finch, and if you need anything, my store's the place to find it. They spent the next hour selecting supplies, with Natalie consulting a list she had made, and Harrison negotiating prices with the ease of long practice. Other customers came and went, and each time, Robert made a point of introducing Natalie, clearly eager to spread the news of Harrison's new employee. Some of the introductions were perfunctory, but others lingered, people asking questions about where she was from and how she was finding life in Colorado. One woman in particular, a sharp-eyed matron named Mrs. Catherine Winters, gave Natalie a thorough looking over before pronouncing, "You seem like a sensible girl. Those Zimmer children need a firm hand and some proper guidance. Their poor mother was a saint, God rest her soul, but Harrison can't be expected to raise them alone." "He's doing remarkably well," Natalie said, feeling defensive on his behalf. "The children are thriving." "I'm sure they are with the woman's influence back in the house," Mrs. Winters said, and though her tone was pleasant enough, Natalie caught the implication that Harrison had been failing before her arrival. Later, as they loaded the supplies into the wagon and watched the children examine their small bags of penny candy, Natalie mentioned the exchange to Harrison. He sighed heavily. "Catherine Winters has opinions about everything and everyone," he said. "She's probably already composing the story she'll tell about us. By tomorrow, half the town will have a dozen versions of who you are and why you're really here." "Why I'm really here," Natalie repeated. "What would they think besides the truth?" Harrison's jaw tightened. Small towns love to talk, and a young woman living in a house with a single man, even with children as chaperones, gives them plenty to speculate about. Heat flooded Natalie's cheeks as she understood his meaning. "That's ridiculous. I'm an employee, a teacher. I know that, and you know that, but gossip doesn't require truth to thrive." He glanced at her, his expression apologetic. "I'm sorry. I should have thought about how it would look, but I was desperate for help, and you were qualified and willing." "I don't care what busybodies think," Natalie said firmly, though her heart was beating faster. "I know why I'm here, and so do you. That's all that matters." Harrison looked at her for a long moment, something unreadable in his storm-gray eyes. Then he nodded. "You're right. That's all that matters." They climbed back into the wagon, and Harrison turned the horses toward home. The children chattered about everything they had seen, passing around their candy and making plans for how to spend the rest of the day. Natalie sat beside Harrison on the driver's bench, acutely aware of his presence, of the way his hands held the reins with casual competence, of the strength in his shoulders and the clean line of his jaw. She was developing feelings for him. The realization crystallized in that moment, undeniable and terrifying. She cared about him in a way that went far beyond employer and employee, beyond even friendship. She admired his dedication to his family, his quiet strength, the gentleness he showed his siblings despite his rough exterior. She found herself thinking about him at odd moments, noticing details like the way his hair fell across his forehead when he was concentrating, or the rare, transformative power of his smile. This was dangerous. She was here to do a job, to help raise these children and manage the household. Falling in love with Harrison Zimmer had not been part of the plan, and it complicated everything. What if he did not feel the same way? What if her feelings made things awkward between them? What if she was reading too much into moments of connection that meant nothing more than mutual respect? Natalie forced herself to focus on the landscape rolling past, on the children's conversations, on anything but the man sitting beside her. She would master these feelings, keep them locked away where they could not disrupt the fragile balance they had achieved. The children needed stability, and Harrison needed help, and she would not jeopardize any of that by revealing emotions that might not be returned. But that night, lying in her small room, with moonlight streaming through the window, Natalie allowed herself to imagine what it might be like if things were different. If she were here, not as an employee, but as something more. If the warmth in Harrison's eyes sometimes meant what she hoped it meant. If the accidental brush of their hands while working together sent electricity through him, the way it did through her. She imagined it, let herself feel the full weight of her longing, and then carefully, deliberately, packed it all away. Tomorrow, she would be professional and friendly and nothing more. Tomorrow, she would remember her place. But tonight, just for a little while, she let herself dream. August brought oppressive heat to the mountain valley, the sun beating down relentlessly day after day. The children grew restless, too hot to focus on lessons, and Natalie adapted by moving their schooling to the early morning hours and letting them spend the hottest part of the day playing in the creek that ran through the property. She would sit on the bank with her skirts tucked up and her feet in the cool water, ostensibly supervising, but mostly just enjoying the sound of their laughter. Harrison worked himself even harder during this time, knowing that winter would come early this high in the mountains and bring with it months of difficulty. He repaired fences, laid in extra hay, reinforced the barn roof, completed a dozen tasks that Natalie barely understood but recognized as essential. She saw him less during the days, but their evenings together became a cherished ritual. After the children were in bed, they would sit on the porch in the relative cool of the night, drinking coffee or lemonade and talking about everything and nothing. Harrison told her about the ranch, about his plans for expanding the cattle herd, about the challenges of working land this high and harsh. Natalie told him about Philadelphia, about her years teaching, about her family, and the losses that had shaped her. One night, as they sat side by side on the porch steps watching heat lightning flicker in the distance, Harrison said, "You miss the city." It was not a question, but Natalie considered it anyway. "Sometimes," she admitted, "I miss museums and theaters and bookshops. I miss the convenience of having everything close by. But I don't miss the noise or the crowds or the feeling that I was just one more anonymous person in a sea of strangers." She turned to look at him. "Here, I matter. What I do makes a real difference to real people I care about. That's worth more than all the museums in the world." Harrison held her gaze, and in the flickering light of the distant storm, his eyes were dark and intense. "The children adore you. This place would fall apart without you. And what about you?" The words escaped before Natalie could stop them, too bold and too revealing. "What do you think?" The silent stretch between them, charged with possibility. Harrison's hand moved on the step between them, his fingers inching closer to hers. "I think you're the best thing that's happened to this family since my mother passed," he said slowly. "I think you brought light back to a house that was drowning in shadows. I think I don't know how I managed before you came, and I don't want to imagine managing without you now." His fingers touched hers, just the lightest brush of skin against skin, but it sent heat flooding through Natalie's entire body. She knew she should pull away, maintain professional distance, but she could not make herself move. Instead, she turned her hand over, letting her palm meet his, their fingers intertwining as naturally as breathing. "I don't want to leave," she whispered. "Not just because of the children, because of you." Harrison's breath caught audibly. "Natalie?" "I know this is complicated," she rushed on. "I know I'm your employee and we have to think about the children and what people might say. But I can't pretend anymore that I don't feel something when I look at you. I can't pretend that my heart doesn't race when you walk into a room, or that I don't count the hours until evening when we can talk." He shifted closer to her on the step, his free hand coming up to cup her face with a gentleness that made her throat tighten. "I've been trying so hard not to feel this," he said roughly, "trying to be appropriate and proper and maintain boundaries. But God help me, Natalie. I think about you constantly. I watch for you throughout the day, listen for your voice, find excuses to be near you. You've become essential to me. And not just because you're good with the children or because you keep the house running, you're just essential." Then he was kissing her, his lips warm and slightly chapped against hers, tasting of coffee and something uniquely him. Natalie's free hand came up to grip his shoulder, holding on as the world tilted and reformed around this new reality where Harrison Zimmer was kissing her and she was kissing him back with all the pent-up longing of the past months. When they finally broke apart, both breathing hard, Harrison rested his forehead against hers. "We should talk about this," he said. "Figure out what it means, how it changes things." "It changes everything," Natalie said. "And nothing. I'm still going to teach the children and help with the house. You're still going to work yourself to exhaustion running this ranch. But now, at the end of the day, we'll have this too." "This," Harrison repeated, as if testing the word. Then he smiled, that rare, transformative expression that made him look years younger. "I like the sound of that." They sat on the porch steps long into the night, hands clasped, talking about how to navigate this new dimension of their relationship. They agreed to be discreet around the children at first, not wanting to confuse or worry them until they were certain of their own feelings. They acknowledged the potential for town gossip, but decided together that they did not care what Catherine Winters or anyone else thought. And they admitted, with a vulnerability that felt like stripping away armor, that what they felt was real and worth pursuing, wherever it might lead. Over the following weeks, Natalie discovered the profound joy of loving and being loved in return. Harrison courted her with the tools at his disposal: wildflowers left on her pillow, an afternoon off when he took the children fishing so she could rest, small repairs made to things she had mentioned were broken. She, in turn, showed her affection through the things she did best: his favorite meals prepared with extra care, a shirt mended so skillfully the tear was invisible, her attention and interest in all the details of his work. And in the stolen moments when the children were occupied or asleep, they would find ways to be close: a kiss in the barn while checking on the horses, hands clasped under the table during supper, long conversations on the porch that stretched until the stars wheeled overhead and the world narrowed to just the two of them. The children, for their part, seemed to sense the shift in the household's atmosphere without fully understanding it. They had always liked Natalie, but now they began to treat her less like a teacher and more like a permanent fixture in their lives. Grace started calling her Miss Natalie Mama in an unconscious blend that made Natalie's heart ache with love. Emma asked her opinion on matters of importance and actually listened to the answers. The boys competed for her attention at meals, both trying to be the one to tell her about their day first. One September morning, as Natalie stood at the kitchen counter kneading bread while the children worked on their lessons at the table, Harrison came in from outside with an odd expression on his face. He met her eyes, and she saw something there that made her pulse quicken. "Miss Natalie, could I borrow you for a moment?" he asked. "There's something outside that needs your attention." The children barely looked up from their work, accustomed now to the adults' comings and goings. Natalie wiped her hands on her apron and followed Harrison out the door, her curiosity growing. He led her around the side of the house to where the old strawberry patch had been, except it was not a strawberry patch anymore. In its place stood a small structure, newly built from fresh lumber that still smelled of pine. It had a peaked roof and a door and 2 large windows. And as Natalie stared at it in confusion, Harrison cleared his throat nervously. "It's a schoolhouse," he said. "A proper one, just for you and the children. I know you've been making do with the kitchen table, but I thought you deserved a real space." somewhere bright and dedicated just to learning. Natalie's hand flew to her mouth, tears stinging her eyes. She moved forward as if in a dream, pushing open the door to reveal an interior flooded with light from the generous windows. Harrison had built desks sized perfectly for 4 different children and a larger desk for the teacher. Shelves lined one wall, ready for books and supplies. A small wood stove sat in the corner, ready for the cold months ahead. Every detail showed thought and care, from the hooks by the door for coats to the slate board mounted on the wall. "When did you do this?" she whispered, turning to face him. "I never saw you working on it." "Early mornings before you woke, late nights after you went to bed," Harrison said, stepping into the schoolhouse behind her. "I wanted it to be a surprise. I wanted you to know that you're not just helping out temporarily. You're part of this family, part of this place, and you deserve space that's yours." Natalie threw her arms around his neck, holding him tight while tears spilled down her cheeks. "It's perfect," she said against his shoulder. "It's the most thoughtful thing anyone has ever done for me." His arms came around her waist, strong and sure. "You've given us so much, Natalie. Given me so much. I wanted to give you something back, something that shows how much you mean to all of us." He pulled back just enough to look into her eyes. "How much you mean to me." She kissed him then, there in the middle of the schoolhouse he had built for her, pouring all her love and gratitude into the connection between them. When they finally parted, both flushed and smiling, Harrison took a deep breath. "There's something else I need to say," he began, then seemed to struggle with the words. "Natalie, I know we haven't been courting very long, and I know you might want more time, but I need you to know my intentions. I'm not interested in a casual situation. I want you to be my wife. I want to build a life with you, raise these children together, and maybe someday have children of our own. I want you beside me for all the years we're given." He reached into his pocket and pulled out a simple gold band. "This was my mother's. She would have loved you, would have been so happy to know you were caring for her children and loving her son. Will you marry me, Natalie? Will you stay here not as an employee, but as my partner in everything?" Joy flooded through Natalie so intensely she felt dizzy with it. "Yes," she said, the word bursting out of her like it had been waiting months to be spoken. "Yes, Harrison, I'll marry you. I want all of that. Everything you said. I want to be your wife and help raise these beautiful children and build a life with you. Yes." He slipped the ring onto her finger, and it fit as if it had been made for her. Then he was kissing her again, and she was laughing and crying simultaneously, overwhelmed by the sudden transformation of her entire future. She had come to Colorado desperate and uncertain, had taken this position out of necessity rather than choice, and somehow, along the way, she had found everything she had ever wanted without knowing she wanted it. They told the children that evening over supper, and the reactions were everything Natalie could have hoped for. Grace clapped her hands and immediately asked if Natalie would be her mama now. Emma smiled with genuine pleasure and announced that she had known this was going to happen. Samuel and Thomas exchanged glances and shrugged, with the casual acceptance of boys who cared more about the practical implications than the emotional ones. "Does this mean you're staying forever?" Thomas asked. "Forever," Natalie confirmed, reaching across the table to squeeze Harrison's hand. "Good," the boy said simply. "I didn't want you to leave." They were married 3 weeks later in the small church in Black Hawk, with half the town in attendance thanks to Catherine Winters, spreading the news far and wide. Natalie wore a simple dress of pale blue that Emma and Grace had helped her choose, and Harrison wore his best suit, his hair slicked back and his eyes bright with happiness. The children stood with them during the ceremony, part of the family being formed through these vows. When the minister pronounced them husband and wife, and Harrison kissed her in front of the whole congregation, Natalie felt a sense of rightness settle over her like a benediction. This was where she was meant to be. This was the life she was meant to live. All the losses and struggles that had brought her to this moment suddenly made sense as necessary steps on the path to this happiness. The reception was held at the ranch, with neighbors bringing food and music and well wishes. Children ran wild through the property, while adults talked and laughed and danced to the sound of a fiddle. As the sun set behind the mountains, painting everything golden rose, Harrison pulled Natalie into his arms for a dance on the porch of the house they would now officially share. "Happy?" he asked, his lips close to her ear. "Beyond measure," she replied, resting her head against his shoulder. "I never imagined I could be this happy." "Neither did I," Harrison admitted. "After my mother died, I thought happiness was something we'd have to wait years to find again. But you brought it back with you, wrapped up in biscuits and patience and love. They danced until the stars came out, and the guests began to depart, calling out congratulations and blessings as they went. The children eventually fell asleep in various corners of the house, exhausted by excitement. Harrison carried each one to bed while Natalie followed, tucking them in and kissing their foreheads. When they finally had the house to themselves, Harrison took Natalie's hand and led her upstairs to the room that was now theirs, not just his. It was larger than the small space off the kitchen where she had been sleeping, with a big bed and a window that looked out over the moonlit valley. Someone, probably one of the well-meaning neighbor women, had left flowers on the bureau and turned down the bed. Harrison closed the door behind them and turned to face her, his expression suddenly serious. "I want you to know," he said quietly, "that every day with you is a gift I never expected to receive. You've transformed this house, this family, my life. I'm going to spend the rest of my days trying to make you as happy as you've made me." Natalie stepped forward, reaching up to cup his face in her hands. "We'll make each other happy," she said. "That's how it works when two people truly love each other. And I do love you, Harrison Zimmer, more than I have words to express." "Then don't use words," he whispered, and drew her into his arms. Their wedding night was tender and passionate, full of whispered promises and gentle discoveries. They learned each other slowly, taking their time, building something precious out of trust and desire and love. And when they finally fell asleep tangled together in the big bed, Natalie felt more at home than she ever had anywhere else in the world. The seasons turned and life settled into new patterns. Natalie taught the children in the beautiful schoolhouse Harrison had built, watching them grow in knowledge and confidence. Samuel shot up several inches and began taking on more ranch responsibilities, working alongside Harrison and learning everything his older brother could teach him. Thomas discovered a talent for working with the horses and spent hours in the barn, patient and gentle with the animals. Emma read every book Natalie could find and talked about becoming a teacher herself someday. Grace bloomed like the strawberries she so carefully tended, her laughter ringing through the house. Harrison and Natalie grew into their roles as partners, learning to anticipate each other's needs and support each other through difficulties. When a hard winter brought sickness to the valley, they nursed the children through colds and fevers together, taking turns sitting up through long nights. When spring brought flooding that damaged part of the southern pasture, Natalie helped Harrison make the difficult decisions about which repairs to prioritize and which to delay. And when Natalie discovered she was pregnant the following summer, nearly a year after their wedding, the joy that filled the house was palpable. The children were excited about a baby, each of them making plans for how they would help. Harrison was tender and protective, insisting Natalie rest more, even though she felt perfectly fine. "I'm pregnant, not fragile," she protested one evening when he tried to take over the supper preparations. "I know," he said, wrapping his arms around her from behind and resting his hands on her still flat stomach. "But you're carrying our child, and that makes you precious beyond measure. Let me take care of you the way you've been taking care of all of us." So Natalie let herself be cared for and found it was not as difficult as she had thought to accept help and support. The children stepped up, taking on more chores without complaint. Samuel proved himself capable of making basic meals when needed. Emma became Natalie's right hand, helping with everything from lesson planning to mending. Even little Grace, now 7.5, did her part by keeping things tidy and entertaining Thomas when he grew restless. Their son was born on a cold February morning in 1880, arriving with the dawn after a long night of labor. Harrison stayed with Natalie throughout, holding her hand and murmuring encouragement, even when she gripped his fingers hard enough to hurt. When the baby finally emerged, wailing his arrival into the world, the midwife placed him in Natalie's arms and pronounced him healthy and strong. "He has your eyes," Natalie said, gazing down at the tiny red-faced creature who had already stolen her heart completely. "And your nose," Harrison replied, his voice thick with emotion. "He's perfect." They named him Henry Daniel Zimmer, and he became the darling of the entire household. The children competed for the privilege of holding him, rocking him, making him smile. Harrison was a devoted father, taking over night feedings when he could so Natalie could rest, walking the floors with Henry when he was fussy, changing diapers without complaint. One night, when Henry was about 3 months old, Natalie woke to find Harrison's side of the bed empty. She rose and followed the sound of soft singing to the main room, where she found her husband standing by the window with their son in his arms. Moonlight streamed through the glass, illuminating both their faces as Harrison sang a lullaby his mother had sung to him. Natalie stood in the doorway watching them, her heart so full she thought it might burst. This man who had been struggling alone when she met him, who had been drowning under the weight of responsibility and grief, was now cradling their son with such tenderness and love. And the house that had been full of chaos and pain was now filled with warmth and laughter and the beautiful mess of a happy family. "I can feel you watching," Harrison said, without turning around, a smile in his voice. "I'm just admiring my view," Natalie replied, coming to stand beside them. She wrapped her arm around Harrison's waist and looked down at Henry, who was gazing up at his father with solemn gray eyes. "You're good at this, being a father." "I had good practice with my siblings," Harrison said. "But this is different. He's ours, Natalie. Part of you and part of me, all mixed together into something entirely new and wonderful." "He is wonderful," she agreed. "They all are. Samuel, Thomas, Emma, Grace, Henry. We've built something beautiful here, haven't we?" Harrison turned to look at her, and in his eyes she saw everything they had been through together and everything still to come. "You built it," he said. "You're the one who came here and saw potential in a broken household and a desperate man. You're the one who fixed things and made them whole." "No," Natalie said firmly. "You had already built the foundation, the house, the ranch, the love you had for your siblings. All I did was add to what was already here. We built this together, Harrison, just like we built that schoolhouse together, and this family, and the life we're living. Together." He kissed her then, carefully because of the baby in his arms, but with a depth of feeling that made her knees weak. "Together," he echoed, "always together." Years continued to pass, marked by the usual joys and sorrows of life. Samuel grew into a fine young man and eventually took over more and more of the ranch operations, working side by side with Harrison. Thomas became known throughout the valley for his skill with horses, training them with a patience and intuition that seemed almost magical. Emma went to Denver for 2 years to attend teacher's college, then returned to Black Hawk to start her own school in town. Grace, sweet Grace, who had once hidden under porches, grew into a beautiful young woman with a talent for healing and a gentle way with anyone who was suffering. Natalie and Harrison had 2 more children, a daughter they named Margaret Rose, who arrived 2 years after Henry, and another son, Joseph Andrew, born 3 years after that. The house rang with the sounds of children and life, and though there were hard times, droughts and harsh winters and losses along the way, there was also more love than Natalie had ever imagined possible. On a warm June evening in 1895, 17 years after she had first arrived in Black Hawk, Natalie stood on the porch of the ranch house and looked out over the land that had become home. She was 40 years old now, her hair threaded with silver and her hands marked by years of work, but she felt more beautiful and more valued than she ever had in her youth. Behind her, she heard the screen door open and close, and then Harrison's arms came around her waist, familiar and comforting. He was 42 now, his dark hair also silver-streaked, his face lined by weather and laughter and time. But his eyes were still that same storm gray that had captivated her from the first day, and his touch still sent warmth flooding through her. "What are you thinking about?" he asked, resting his chin on her shoulder. "Everything," Natalie said. "That day I arrived and found you on the roof, so determined and alone. How frightened I was, and how I had no idea what I was really walking into. I was on that roof trying to fix leaks and hold everything together through sheer stubbornness," Harrison remembered. "I thought if I could just patch the holes, keep the rain out, everything would be fine. But a house is more than a roof, isn't it?" Natalie turned in his arms to face him. "You knew that? You'd already built something solid, something that just needed the right people to help it flourish." "You saw potential where I only saw problems," Harrison said. "You looked at 4 wild children and a man at the end of his rope and decided we were worth the effort. You gave us structure and love and patience, and you showed me that accepting help isn't weakness, that building a life with someone is better than trying to do everything alone. You taught me things too," Natalie said softly. "That home isn't a place, it's the people you love, that sometimes the best things come from the hardest circumstances. that taking a risk on something uncertain can lead to more happiness than playing it safe ever could. They stood together in the golden evening light, holding each other and watching the sun sink behind the mountains. Inside the house, they could hear their children's voices. Henry, now 15 and sounding more like his father every day. Margaret, 13 and full of questions about everything. Joseph, 10 and always in motion. Somewhere on the property, Samuel was probably checking on the cattle one last time before dark. Thomas would be in the barn with the horses. Emma was in town, but she visited every Sunday. Grace was courting a young doctor from Denver and would likely marry him soon. "Do you ever wonder what would have happened if you hadn't come that day?" Harrison asked. "If you'd arrived a week later after I'd sent that letter turning you away? Or if you'd decided Colorado was too far and stayed in Philadelphia?" "I try not to think about it," Natalie admitted, "because the idea of never knowing you, never loving you, never having this life is too painful to contemplate. I'd still be teaching other people's children and living in a boarding house and feeling like something essential was missing, even if I couldn't name what it was." "I'd have kept struggling," Harrison said. "Probably would have lost the ranch eventually because I couldn't keep up with everything. The children would have suffered, grown up without the education and stability they needed. I'd have been a bitter, broken man instead of the happiest one I know." "So we saved each other," Natalie said. "Two people who needed exactly what the other had to give, who found each other at exactly the right moment." "You saved me," Harrison corrected. "I was drowning, and you were the lifeline I didn't even know I needed." "Then let's call it even," Natalie suggested, smiling up at him. "Because you gave me a home and a family and a love I never dared to hope for. You gave me purpose and belonging and a place where I fit perfectly. We saved each other, Harrison. That's the truth of it." He kissed her as the last light faded from the sky, and it felt the same as their first kiss years ago on these same porch steps, electric and tender and full of promise. Some things, Natalie reflected, only got better with time. Love was one of them. The years that followed brought the satisfactions and challenges of watching their children grow into adults. Henry took over the ranch when Harrison decided to step back, managing it with a combination of his father's work ethic and his mother's careful planning. Margaret moved to Denver to study medicine, becoming one of the few female doctors in Colorado. Joseph surprised everyone by developing a passion for law, eventually practicing in Black Hawk and serving as the town's mayor. Samuel married a girl from town and built a house on the edge of the ranch property, raising 5 children of his own while continuing to work the land he loved. Thomas started a horse breeding operation that became known throughout the state. Emma married a fellow teacher and raised 3 studious children who all inherited their mother's love of learning. Grace married her doctor and moved to Denver, but she visited often, bringing her 4 children to run wild on the ranch where she had grown up. And through it all, Natalie and Harrison remained the center around which the family orbited, the constants in a changing world. They aged together gracefully, their hair turning white, their movements slowing, but their love never diminishing. If anything, it deepened with every year, every shared memory, every challenge faced and overcome together. On their 30th wedding anniversary, the entire family gathered at the ranch for a celebration that lasted an entire weekend. Children and grandchildren filled every room of the house, their laughter echoing off the walls. There was music and dancing, elaborate meals and endless stories, photographs taken to preserve these precious moments. At one point, Natalie found herself standing in the doorway of the schoolhouse Harrison had built for her all those years ago. It was still in use, now teaching her grandchildren the same way she had once taught their parents. The desks were worn smooth by years of use, the slate board marked with the day's lessons in familiar handwriting, Emma's now. Harrison came up behind her, slipping his hand into hers. "Remember when I surprised you with this?" he asked. "I cried," Natalie said. "I couldn't believe you had built something so perfect, so exactly what I needed without me ever saying so. I wanted you to know you belonged here," Harrison said, "that you weren't just passing through or temporarily helping out, that you were essential and permanent and valued." "I did know," Natalie assured him. "Every nail you hammered, every board you measured and cut, told me that I mattered to you. It was the most romantic gesture anyone has ever made, building me a place to do the work I loved." "You're still romantic," came a voice from behind them, and they turned to find Emma smiling at them from the doorway. "After 30 years, you two are still as in love as newlyweds. Do you know how rare that is? How special?" "We know," Harrison said, pulling Natalie closer. "We never take it for granted." "You've set an impossible standard for the rest of us," Emma teased. "Finding someone who looks at you the way Dad looks at Mom, who builds you schoolhouses and fights for you and loves you so completely that nothing else matters. That's the dream we're all chasing." "It's not impossible," Natalie said gently. "It just requires finding someone who sees you clearly, who values what you value, and who's willing to build a life with you one day at a time. Your father and I didn't have some magical, effortless connection from the start. We had respect and attraction and potential, and we chose every day to nurture those things into something deeper." "She's right," Harrison added. "Love at first sight might happen in novels, but real love is built through years of shared work and compromise and choosing each other even when it's hard. Your mother and I have had our difficult times, our disagreements, our moments of frustration, but we always came back to the foundation we'd built and chose to keep building on it." Emma hugged them both, her eyes suspiciously bright. "I hope you know how much it means to all of us, having you as an example, knowing that real, lasting love is possible because we've watched you live it." As the celebrations continued, Natalie felt overwhelmed with gratitude for the life she had been given. She thought about that frightened young woman who had arrived in Black Hawk with everything she owned in a single carpet bag, desperate and uncertain, and trying so hard to appear confident. She thought about the man on the roof, alone and struggling, trying to hold everything together through sheer force of will. Neither of them could have imagined what they were beginning that day. Neither could have predicted how they would save each other, heal each other, and ultimately build something beautiful together. But looking around at the family gathered in every corner of the ranch, at the life that had grown from those uncertain beginnings, Natalie knew that every struggle had been worth it. Harrison caught her eye across the crowded room, and his smile was answer and promise and everything they had been to each other for 3 decades. She smiled back, and in that simple exchange was all the love they had built, nail by nail, day by day, choice by choice. That night, after all the guests had departed and the house was quiet once more, Natalie and Harrison walked out to the small cemetery on the hillside, where his parents were buried. They visited regularly, keeping the graves tended and telling the stones about the lives being lived, the grandchildren being raised, the love continuing to grow. "Mama would have loved you," Harrison said, standing before his mother's grave. "She would have been so grateful that you came to us when we needed you most." "I think she sent me," Natalie said softly. "I think she saw me searching for purpose and saw her family needing help, and somehow arranged for our paths to cross. It sounds fanciful, but sometimes I feel her presence here, approving and proud of what we've built." "Not fanciful," Harrison disagreed. "I've felt it too. Like she's watching over all of us, satisfied that her children are cared for and her son found happiness again." They stood in comfortable silence for a while, holding hands and listening to the wind whisper through the pine trees. The moon was bright enough to cast shadows, and stars scattered across the sky in brilliant profusion. The same stars that had witnessed their first kiss, their wedding, every significant moment of their shared life. "I found you on a roof," Natalie said suddenly, "alone and determined, trying to patch holes and keep everything from falling apart. And you'd built so much more than just shelter, hadn't you? You'd built a foundation of love and responsibility and commitment. All it needed was someone to help you see the potential." Harrison turned to face her, both his hands holding hers now. "And you'd built yourself into a woman of strength and capability, carrying loss but not letting it define you. All you needed was a place where your gifts would be recognized and valued." "We were both builders," Natalie mused, "both trying to create something solid and lasting from difficult circumstances. We just needed to find each other and start building together." "Best partnership I ever entered into," Harrison said. "Best decision I ever made was letting you stay that first day instead of sending you back to Philadelphia." "Best decision I ever made was staying," Natalie replied. "Choosing possibility over safety, love over certainty, you over everything else I might have had." They kissed there in the moonlight, surrounded by the evidence of lives well lived and love that transcended death. When they finally walked back to the house hand in hand, Natalie felt the profound contentment of a story completed, a circle closed, a promise fulfilled. The ranch spread out around them, buildings solid and maintained, land productive and cared for, animals safe in their shelters. Inside the house, Henry and his family were staying the night. and Natalie could see light in the upstairs windows where her granddaughter was probably reading past bedtime. The schoolhouse stood dark but ready for Monday's lessons. The cemetery held those they had loved and lost, their memories preserved in stone and story. And through it all, the constant was the love between Natalie and Harrison, the partnership they had forged from desperate circumstances and mutual need, the family they had built and nurtured and watched flourish. Years later, when Natalie was 68 and Harrison was 70, they celebrated their 50th wedding anniversary with another massive family gathering. The ranch was full to overflowing with children, grandchildren, and even a few great-grandchildren. 3 generations of family that existed because 2 people had taken a chance on each other half a century before. At the celebration, Henry stood to make a toast, his voice carrying across the crowd. 50 years ago, my mother married the man who had already captured her heart, though neither of them knew it yet. She arrived here as a stranger, hired to teach and help, and instead became the cornerstone of our family. Dad was trying to hold everything together alone, and Mom showed him that he didn't have to. Together, they built something that has sustained all of us, a home full of love, a family bonded by more than blood, a legacy of commitment and partnership and choosing each other every single day. He raised his glass. To Natalie and Harrison Zimmer, the best parents anyone could ask for, the example we all aspire to follow. May they have many more years together, and may we all be fortunate enough to find a love that lasts as long and burns as bright as theirs. Everyone drank to that, and then Margaret stood to add her own tribute, followed by Joseph and then the others. Samuel, Thomas, Emma, Grace, all of them speaking about the influence their sister-in-law and brother had had on their lives. There were tears and laughter, stories from the early days when things had been so chaotic, and testimonials to the stability and love that Natalie and Harrison had created. When it was finally Natalie's turn to speak, she rose slowly, Harrison's hand supporting her. She looked around at the gathered faces, so many of them sharing features with either her or her husband, and felt almost dizzy with the magnitude of what they had created. I came to Colorado 50 years ago with no idea what I was walking into, she began, her voice still strong despite her years. I thought I was taking a job, starting over after loss, finding a way to survive. Instead, I found everything I needed and more than I had ever dreamed possible. I found children who needed me, and a man who loved me, and a place where I could build something lasting. She squeezed Harrison's hand. This man, who I found alone on a roof, trying to hold his world together, showed me what real strength looks like. Not the strength to do everything yourself, but the strength to accept help, to be vulnerable, to build partnerships instead of walls. He gave me his trust and his heart, and in return, I gave him mine. Her eyes found each of her children and stepchildren in turn. And all of you, every single one, are the proof that love can heal and grow and create beauty from hardship. You are the reason everything was worth it. You are the legacy we're most proud of. There was not a dry eye in the room when she finished, and Harrison stood to wrap his arms around her, while their family applauded and cheered. In his embrace, Natalie felt the weight of 50 years of love, of building something meaningful one day at a time, of choosing partnership and commitment and each other through everything life had thrown at them. That night, lying in bed in the house where they had raised their family and built their life, Harrison turned to Natalie with a serious expression. "I've been thinking," he said, "about that roof where you first saw me." "The one you were repairing alone?" Natalie asked, smiling. "That one," he confirmed. "I was trying to fix it because I thought if I could just keep the rain out, keep everything from falling apart physically, then somehow we'd all be fine. But I was wrong. A house is more than a roof, more than walls and floors. It's the people inside it, the love that fills it, the memories created within it." "You knew that already," Natalie said gently. "You'd already created that with your siblings, even before I arrived. You just needed help sustaining it." "No," Harrison disagreed. "I'd created survival, bare minimum existence. You created a home. You filled our house with warmth and laughter, and the sense that we would not just survive, but thrive. You taught us that family isn't just about responsibility. It's about joy and connection and building something together." "We built it together," Natalie insisted. "I could not have done any of it without you. Without your trust and your love and your willingness to let me in. You'd already built the foundation, Harrison. The strength and the commitment and the capacity to love deeply. I just added to what was already there. He pulled her closer, and they lay entwined as they had for 50 years, their bodies knowing each other's contours perfectly. I love you, he whispered into the darkness. 50 years, and I love you more now than I did the day we married. And I love you, Natalie replied. More than words can express, more than gestures can show. You are the best thing that ever happened to me, Harrison Zimmer. Finding you on that roof, alone and determined, was the beginning of everything good in my life. They fell asleep holding each other, and if their breathing synchronized and their hearts beat in rhythm, it was only because they had been building toward this harmony for 5 decades, one small choice at a time. Natalie Lawrence Zimmer passed away peacefully in her sleep at age 72, with Harrison holding her hand and their children gathered around her bed. Her last words were about the strawberry patch and how beautiful the berries would be that year. She slipped away as the sun rose, painting the mountains gold, and her family wept but also smiled through their tears because they knew she had lived a full, rich life surrounded by love. Harrison lived 3 more years he spent telling stories about Natalie to anyone who would listen. He made sure every grandchild and great-grandchild knew about the day she arrived, about her strength and intelligence and capacity for love. He maintained the ranch and the schoolhouse and visited her grave every single day, bringing wildflowers in summer and pine boughs in winter. When his time came, Harrison Zimmer died as he had lived, surrounded by family in the house he had built with his own hands, secure in the knowledge that the life he and Natalie had created would continue long after they were gone. His last words were about seeing her again, about finding her waiting for him, the way she had waited on the porch so many evenings. They were buried side by side on the hillside cemetery, their graves marked with simple stones that bore their names, their years, and a single shared inscription. Together, they built more than shelter. They built a home, a family, and a love that time cannot diminish. The ranch continued to operate under Henry's management, then passed to his son, and on through the generations. The schoolhouse remained in use, teaching new children the way Natalie had taught their ancestors. And in Black Hawk, Colorado, the story of the woman who arrived desperate and alone, and the man she found repairing a roof became legend, told and retold as an example of how love can grow from the most unlikely beginnings. Decades later, when Henry's granddaughter stood in the old house preparing for her own wedding, she found herself drawn to the hallway where photographs lined the walls. There, among images of countless family members across the generations, hung a portrait of Natalie and Harrison, taken on their 50th anniversary. Despite their age in the photograph, despite the silver hair and lined faces, the love between them was palpable. You could see it in the way they leaned toward each other, in their clasped hands, in the identical expressions of contentment and joy. They really loved each other, didn't they? The bride-to-be said to her father, Henry's son. More than most people can imagine, he replied. Great-grandmother Natalie used to say that she found great-grandfather Harrison on a roof, trying to fix holes and hold everything together alone. And she realized that he'd built more than just shelter. He'd built a foundation for love and family, even if he didn't know it yet. All it needed was the right person to help him see the potential. And she was the right person. They were right for each other, her father corrected. 2 people who needed exactly what the other could give, who chose to build something together instead of struggling alone. That's what real love looks like. Not magic or fate, but choice and work and commitment every single day. The young woman studied the photograph for a long moment, taking in the evidence of a love that had lasted lifetimes and spawned generations. I want that, she said finally. Not just a wedding, but a marriage like theirs, a partnership that lasts, that builds something meaningful. Then marry someone who sees you clearly and values what you value, her father advised, echoing Natalie's words from generations before. Find someone willing to build a life with you one day at a time, through good times and hard times and everything in between. That's the secret great-grandmother and great-grandfather knew. Love isn't something you find finished and perfect. It's something you build together, piece by piece, year by year, until you've created something that will outlast you both. The wedding took place at the ranch, as family weddings always did. And during the celebration, someone pointed out the old schoolhouse where Natalie had taught, and the hillside cemetery where she and Harrison rested together. The bride made a point of visiting both places, laying flowers on their graves, and standing for a moment in the schoolhouse, trying to imagine what it must have been like in those early days when everything was new and uncertain. She thought about a woman stepping down from a stagecoach with everything she owned in one carpet bag, looking up to see a man on a roof, alone and determined. She thought about the courage it must have taken to stay, to commit to something unknown, to trust that what looked like mere employment might become something more. And she thought about that man, drowning under responsibility and grief, choosing to accept help instead of insisting he could manage alone, choosing to trust a stranger with his siblings and his heart, choosing day after day to build something with her instead of protecting himself from the possibility of more loss. They had both been brave, she realized, and their bravery had made possible everything that came after: the family, the legacy, the love that echoed down through generations. Because they had chosen each other, everyone who came after had the example of what real partnership looked like. As the sun set on another perfect Colorado evening, the ranch filled with the sounds of celebration, the young woman rejoined the party holding her new husband's hand. They were just beginning their own story, taking the first steps on a path that might last decades if they were lucky and wise. But they walked it with the knowledge that it was possible, that love could be built to last, that two people with courage and commitment could create something beautiful. On the hillside, the sun gilded two simple gravestones, and if the breeze whispered through the pine trees like soft laughter, it was only fitting. Natalie and Harrison had built something that would outlast stone and time, a family bound by love, a legacy of partnership, and proof that sometimes the most extraordinary love stories begin with the simplest moments: a woman arriving at a ranch, a man on a roof, and the recognition, slow but certain, that they had each found exactly what they needed when they most needed to find it. The love between Natalie Lawrence and Harrison Zimmer had transformed both their lives and created ripples that continued to spread long after they were gone. And in the end, that was the most anyone could hope for: to build something real and lasting, to love deeply and well, and to leave the world better than they found it. Together, they had built more than just shelter. They had built a home, a family, and a love story for the ages. And in the mountains of Colorado, as long as the ranch stood and the stories were told, that love would continue to inspire everyone who heard it. A testament to the power of choosing partnership over isolation, vulnerability over protection, and love over fear. It was a story worth telling, worth remembering, and worth aspiring to match, because it proved that the greatest love stories are not about grand gestures or perfect circumstances, but about two imperfect people choosing to build something perfect together. One day, one choice, one moment of courage at a time.